On the political scene, it was Republicans, wasn't it, in the 20th century, who were some of the strongest supporters of legalizing abortion?
Yes, I mean, ironically, until Ronald Reagan, the Republicans were more likely to support abortion than Democrats because most Catholics in this country at that time were Democrats. And therefore, Democrats were less likely to be pro abortion. When Ronald Reagan ran for and in this period, by the way, Barry Goldwater and Ronald Reagan as governors were among the most, Nelson Rockefeller, were among the most supportive of abortion rights.
Even Reagan.
Yeah, even Reagan in the state of California. But what Reagan realized when he ran for the president, and actually Nixon realized this even earlier, was that if he could bring Catholics out of the Democratic Party into the Republican Party, that he could totally shift the balance of power. And so Nixon started taking a strongly anti-abortion position, and Reagan went even further than that. And the consequence of that was they brought most Catholics who were previously Democrats into the Republican Party. And that gave them far more power. And this was basically a political movement that distorted what previously had been the distribution of individuals, because most Catholics cared a lot about what Democrats wanted in terms of public policies. But once they realized that Republicans would oppose abortion, this was key to many Catholics. And they decided to say, well, the hell with the other issues about, equality and child care and health care and so on. If Republicans are prepared to outlaw abortion, we'll go with them on that. So they became single issue voters and shifted parties.
Which is an interesting point. I don't want to get too into the weeds about this, but it is useful to note that it was only very recently in our culture's history, especially American culture's history, that the majority of Christians became anti-abortion.
Yes.
Up until the late 70s, early 80s, the vast majority of non-Catholic Christians were actually fine with abortion.
I would say they weren't jazzed about it, but they were of the opinion that I expressed at the beginning of this episode, that it should be safe, legal, and rare. And so, for instance, the president of this Southern Baptist Convention, when Roe v. Wade was decided, said, "Hey, we're fine with this. This decision is between a woman and her doctor and God, and we're going to stay out of it." And there were anti-abortion activists within evangelicalism, but the biggest players and the consensus view within evangelicalism was, we're okay with this, until we had folks like Paul Weyrich and Jerry Falwell put their heads together and say, we need to galvanize a religious right. We need to get agents of conservative Christianity into the government. And this was primarily because they wanted to protect their universities that they did not want to admit Black students to from being forced into that. And so thus began this campaign of turning abortion into a central evangelical identity marker.
Yeah.
And so like you said, that was late 70s, early 80s is when the balance shifted, and that took over as central identity marker for evangelicalism.
Indeed. So there you go. It's not like it was even, a lot of people have this feeling like it was ever thus, and thus it would ever be, but that's not at all the case.
Yeah. And in fact, I think even among Catholics, it wasn't until the 19th century that a opposition to pre-quickening abortion became salient and conspicuous. Prior to that, for the 1900 years before that, the consensus view within Christianity was precisely that it was at the moment where the fetus is fully formed, where it is recognizably human, where it is moving on its own accord, that abortion then becomes a problem or murder or something like that.
Interesting.
So personhood throughout the overwhelming majority of the history of Christianity has been viewed as something achieved at some point within the gestational period and not at the moment of conception, although there are exceptions, and we'll get to those later.
Under my leadership, the Republican Party will always support the creation of strong, thriving, and healthy American families.
He starts out by talking about the Republican Party being the party of families. And this was really a way to talk about IVF, which of course are the fertility treatments. And that became a major topic of the national conversation after Alabama had a court ruling that would have really limited access to those treatments.
I strongly support the availability of IVF for couples who are trying to have a precious baby. What could be more beautiful or better than that? Today, I'm pleased.
There's very few things that the country is unified around right now, and support for IVF is one of them. So Trump comes out and says that he too supports those treatments. He believes access to them should be kept open and free. So that was his first point. Then
Many people have asked me what my position is on abortion and abortion rights,
he moves into the abortion part of his remarks.
especially since I was proudly the person responsible for the ending of something that
And the first thing he does is take credit for ending Roe v. Wade, which is, of course, the decision that created a constitutional right to abortion.
I want to thank the 6 justices, Chief Justice John Roberts, Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, and Neil Gorsuch, incredible people.
And then he moves to what he sees as his future thoughts, where the country should go in this new post-Roe era.
This 50-year battle over Roe v. Wade took it out of the federal hands and brought it into the hearts, minds, and vote of the people in each state. It was really something.
And what he basically says is that it should be left to the states.
Now it's up to the states to do the right thing. Like Ronald Reagan, I am strongly in favor of exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. You must follow your heart on this issue. But
He expresses support that bans should include exemptions for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. If a woman falls into any of those 3 categories, she should be allowed to get an abortion.
at the end of the day, it's all about will of the people. That's where we are right now, and that's what we want, the will of the people.
But the most striking thing about this 4-minute video was perhaps the issue that he didn't mention at all, the issue he left out, which is this question of a 15-week federal ban. Practically since the fall of Roe, since the Dobbs case overturned that right, the anti-abortion movement has been pushing to get Republicans to line up behind this idea of a 15-week federal ban, effectively a restriction that would cover the entire country. So in the 30 or so states that allow abortion past that point in pregnancy, they would no longer be allowed to do that. All abortion across the country would be criminalized after 15 weeks.
So a huge change for blue states all over the place.
A huge change for blue states, some swing states, even some more conservative states that haven't passed these more restrictive total bans. Trump has been wishy-washy on the issue for 2 years or so. He's sort of dangled that maybe he would get behind this push and support a 15-week federal ban, but he never quite committed to it. And what we see in this video is that he's still not committing to it. He doesn't say if such legislation came to his desk. He doesn't say whether he would sign it. But what the anti-abortion movement hears in this is that he will not be advocating for this policy.
So he's in essence pulling away from what the mainstream of the anti-abortion movement wants, right? This federal ban. But how should we understand what he's doing here? Like, what's he up to?
Well, what he's trying to do is win the election. That's what he's trying to do here. I mean, abortion is a hugely important issue, this race. Democrats hope it will be the issue that could define and decide this election. Since the right to an abortion was overturned, it transformed American politics in some ways. It created this coalition of pro-abortion rights voters who have turned out for Democrats again and again. They've turned out in the midterms. They've turned out in small sort of state legislative elections. They've turned out in gubernatorial races in 2023. And Trump knows that. And so what we're seeing him do is to try to find a path through this issue that he believes has been damaging to Republicans. And what he's attempting to do with this statement is sort of defang some of the Democratic power, some of this energizing force that abortion rights has become for Democrats in American politics.
But that's a pretty sharp pivot, right? I mean, this is the president who takes credit for overturning Roe, after all, and now he's trying to tack back to the middle.
It is a pivot, but it's not all that surprising of one. This is a politician who, unlike probably anyone else in American public life, has taken just about every position on abortion someone could have throughout his career.
Would President Trump ban partial birth abortion?
Well, look, I'm very pro-choice. I hate the concept of abortion.
When he first started flirting with a presidential run back in the late 90s, he went on TV and said he was very pro-choice.
But you would not ban it?
No.
Or ban partial birth
No,
abortion?
I am pro-choice in every respect and as far as it goes, but I just hate it.
Just very briefly, I'm pro-life.
A decade or so later, he became pro-life before an audience of conservatives.
I've evolved on many issues over the years, and you know who else has is Ronald Reagan evolved on many issues. And I am pro-life, and if you look at...
And then in 2016, when he ran, he was never the candidate of the anti-abortion crowd. They didn't trust him. They knew how he had moved on their issue. Many of them voted for other candidates, but he won over the rank and file conservative Christian voters. And they extracted during that campaign a series of promises from him.
I am pro-life, and I will be appointing pro-life judges. I would think...
Most significantly was that he would appoint what he called pro-life judges.
Do you want to see the court overturn Roe v. Wade?
Well, if we put another 2 or perhaps 3 justices on, that's really what's going to be, that will happen. And that'll happen automatically, in my opinion, because I am putting pro-life justices on the court.
And he got elected, and he changed the composition of the court to a more socially conservative bent for a generation. He worked to defund Planned Parenthood. And by the time he ran again in 2020, the anti-abortion movement was calling him the most pro-life president in history. And he didn't win, but he turned out millions of Christian conservative voters behind him.
Right. And so Trump leaves office in 2021, and then a year later, all of those appointments he made to the court give the anti-abortion movement really its biggest win in generations, the overturning of Roe v. Wade.
His promise to appoint those pro-life judges, as he put it, bears fruit in a massive way, in a way that outpaced even what the anti-abortion movement had hoped for when they first extracted those promises for Trump back in 2016. But what they didn't see coming on either side of the abortion debate was how quickly the politics would transform. That's when we saw this historically energizing issue for Republicans become really a much more motivating issue for Democrats and independents.
I think the Republicans speak very inarticulately about this subject.
And when Trump saw those politics change, he began criticizing the anti-abortion movement and their leaders.
I watched some of them without the exceptions, et cetera, et cetera. I said, other than certain parts of the country, you're not going to win on this issue, but you will.
As pushing for restrictions that were really just, he felt a little bit too harsh. He blamed them for Republican defeats in the 2022 midterms. And so he expressed some views that this was an issue, abortion, that even though he was happy to take credit for putting those justices in who overturned Roe, that the politics of this issue, how it all shook out in the post-Roe world, was hurting Republicans and was a political loser.
So in other words, throughout his career, he's followed the political wins on abortion.
Exactly. For the anti-abortion movement, this is a spiritual quest. The effort to end abortion is an effort to right what they see as a moral wrong in American life. For Trump, like so many things, this is politics. This is transactional. He'll give the anti-abortion movement this, and they'll give him his votes.
It's not about morality. It's about politics.
It's not about morality. It's about politics. It's about winning votes. It's about courting interest groups and building his coalition. And so that long history of back and forth, of transactional politics, of flip-flopping, that all really leads us to this moment. At the end of the video, he says,
Always go by your heart, but we must win. We have to win.
We have to win. And that's basically Trump's views on abortion in a nutshell.
He's kind of saying the quiet part out loud, right? Like, this isn't about abortion. It's about winning votes. And if this issue isn't going to win me votes, I'm ditching it.
That's exactly right. And that, of course, leads to a more essential question, which is, will his political gamble to chart this middle path, well, Will it work?